You open your eyes slowly, though it hardly matters. There is no bright morning light streaming in through curtains, no alarm clock flashing digits. Instead, you're greeted by the dim, smoky haze of a Viking longhouse. The air is thick, almost chewy, as if you could slice it with a knife and spread it on bread. Not that anyone here has butter to spare. What you smell first is wood smoke, sharp and clinging, layered with the sour tang of drying fish and the faint musk of animals that inconveniently share this space with you. You're lying on a bedding pile that could generously be described as straw. Less generously, it is a mixture of flattened grasses, bits of old hay, and probably a few fleas who did not bother to evacuate overnight. Above you, heavy beams stretch across the ceiling, blackened from years of fire smoke curling upward. Every surface carries the scent of centuries of burning wood, because fires here are rarely, if ever, allowed to die. When you shift, the skins piled over you, sheep, goat, perhaps even a fox that was unlucky last season, slip off your shoulder. The morning air bites at once, damp and cool, like stepping barefoot onto a stone floor in midwinter. It is not the cozy nip of a brisk autumn morning. It is the sort of chill that lingers in your bones, reminding you that insulation is still 1,000 years away. You pull the skins back up quickly, understanding now why everyone in this hall seems permanently bundled, layered like walking bundles of wool. But warmth comes at a price. The longhouse is crowded. Privacy, as you know it, does not exist. Your bed is not your own bed, but a shared sleeping platform lined along the walls. To one side, a child snores softly, drooling onto their sleeve. On the other, someone's elbow rests rather unceremoniously against your ribs. If you roll left, you'll get a mouthful of straw. If you roll right, you'll get a family member or perhaps just the family's goat, who also enjoys this spot. Congratulations! Your bed now comes with free livestock. The heart of the longhouse is the fire, a shallow hearth smoldering at the center. Overnight, the flames were banked with peat or ash to keep them alive without blazing. Now, in the gray dawn, they glow faintly like half-forgotten embers, releasing little curls of smoke that rise lazily to the roof. There is no chimney, only a smoke hole, so the haze drifts downward, settles in your hair, and stings your eyes just enough to keep you blinking. Breathing here is a daily compromise. Either accept the smoke or freeze outside. Most people choose smoke. Around you! Others are stirring. A cough here, a yawn there, the creak of wood as someone stretches against the beams. The sounds are gentle but constant, a reminder that in a Viking household you are never alone. Even the animals join in. A chicken clucks impatiently, announcing it has already laid an egg and would like someone to notice. A pig grunts in its pen at the far end of the hall. And from outside, faintly, comes the low bellow of a cow that has discovered, with horror, that winter still exists. You rub your hands together, noticing the roughness of your skin. There is no hand cream, no lotion, just the simple fact that wool, ash, and hard work grind against your fingers daily. Your breath is visible in the chill air, curling in little clouds that mingle with the wood smoke. You sit up slowly, feeling the weight of the furs slip down, and your body protests, stiff from a night spent on straw rather than any notion of a mattress. You may find yourself longing, just for a moment, for something with springs, or even a pillow that isn't stuffed with old feathers and the occasional quill still attached. Morning here is not a leisurely affair. There is no snooze button. Life begins when the fire must be coaxed back to life, when animals demand feeding, when chores wait with the patience of stones. Someone throws another log on the embers, sending a shower of sparks upward. The fire groans back awake, filling the hall with a momentary flare of light and heat. Faces glow orange in the flicker, shadows long and shifting across the beams. The room feels briefly alive, though the cold outside still presses at the walls like an eager intruder. You take stock of your surroundings again, realizing that survival here isn't about comfort, but the longhouse is more fortress than home, more survival bunker than living room. And yet, for its residents, it is the heart of life warmth. Food, protection, companionship, all rolled into one smoky package. It is noisy, crowded, itchy, and smelly, but it is also community. You are never far from others. Which, depending on how much you like your family, is either comforting or deeply irritating. As you rise, brushing bits of straw from your clothing, your stomach gives a small, traitorous growl. The skins and smoke may have kept you alive through the night, but they do not fill you. And in the Viking Age, the first question of the day is always the same. What's for breakfast? And so, you shuffle toward the hearth, hoping the pot contains something edible. But as you peer into the clay vessel, you discover that breakfast in this time and place is less than inspiring. Porridge, if you're lucky. Stale bread, if you're not. Either way, it is time to greet the day with a spoon, not a smile. You drag yourself closer to the hearth, rubbing the sleep from your smoke-stung eyes. And there it is, the clay pot. It has been sitting patiently all night, tilted slightly toward the fire's warmth. You lift the wooden lid, and a faint hiss escapes as yesterday's porridge greets you. It's not exactly a cheerful greeting. The mixture inside looks less like food and more like a building material barley boiled into a thick, grayish paste congealed to the texture of wet plaster. You poke at it with the spoon, and it does not poke back, but it also does not yield. Breakfast in the Viking Age was not a moment of culinary delight. There were no stacks of pancakes, no golden butter melting into hot bread, and certainly no steaming mugs of coffee. You're lucky if you can coax this porridge into being sweet. If someone remembered to stir in dried berries last night, it's practically a holiday. If not, it tastes faintly of smoke, salt, and faint despair. Still, this is your fuel for the day, and so you scoop a portion into a wooden bowl, pretending you don't notice the gritty texture of ash that drifted in from the fire overnight. As you eat, you quickly realize that variety is not the defining trait of your diets. Vikings ate what they could grow, catch, or preserve. And in winter, that list shrinks dramatically. Salted fish is common, and you can smell some drying on racks outside, their leathery flesh stiff and unyielding. Dried cod, in particular, is famous for being so hard you could knock on it like a door. To eat it, you must soak it, pound it, and chew with determination. In moments like this, you begin to understand why Viking teeth were so strong they had no choice. Still, even these plain meals carried a certain rhythm. Bread, baked in small clay ovens or flat over a fire, accompanied the porridge when flour was available. It wasn't the fluffy loaf you're used to. Viking bread was dense, dark, and filled with coarse grains that left your jaw tired after a few bites. Occasionally, a fortunate household had honey to sweeten it, turning a humble meal into something almost luxurious. But most mornings, it was porridge, bread, maybe some curdled milk, and water that you hoped was clean enough to drink. Your bowl of porridge warms your hands, and you notice how important even this humble ritual is. The fire, the pot, the ladling of hot food, it isn't much, but it gathers the household together. Children yawn as they eat, elders mutter about chores, and someone already begins to list what must be done before sundown. Food isn't indulgence here. It is survival ration, carefully measured and never wasted. If someone leaves even a spoonful at the bottom of the bowl, someone else will happily claim it. You can imagine, just for a moment, the contrast between the myth and the reality. When people picture Vikings, they think of feast-long tables groaning under roasted meats, horns of ale, laughter booming in smoky halls. That happened, of course, but only on rare occasions. Most mornings, it was this: a mouthful of barley paste and a sigh, followed by the knowledge that the day's work would soon begin. In its own way, this simplicity is grounding. You start the day with the same humble food as your neighbors, your children, and even your chieftain, unless he has special supplies. Everyone shares the same bowl of monotony. As you scrape the last sticky bit from your bowl, you wonder what you'd crave most if you could import something from the modern world. A slice of toast with butter, perhaps, or a cup of coffee so strong it could scare a Viking berserker? But no such luxuries are coming. You set the bowl aside, and the warmth fades quickly from your hands, leaving behind the chill that seeps from the walls. Breakfast is finished, and your stomach is only partly satisfied. Yet, as you glance toward the doorway, you realize that food here is always in conversation with the land and the sky. What you eat depends entirely on the weather, the soil, and the sea. And as you gather yourself to begin the day's chores, you can feel the weight of that relationship in every bite. The food fills you just enough to survive, but never enough to forget the cold world waiting outside. And outside is exactly where you must go. For the next challenge is not in the bowl, but in the air itself. If breakfast is thin, the climate is thinner still. To understand the Viking Age, you must step into the cold, damp, relentless weather that shaped every life. You push open the heavy wooden door of the longhouse, and the world outside greets you with a chill that feels less like air and more like a personality. The cold Hirdocin tea simply nip at your nose the way a crisp autumn morning might it settles deep into your bones. A damp weight that lingers all day as if the weather itself has signed a long-term lease on your body. The first breath you take fogs instantly, a pale cloud that drifts upward before being whisked away by the wind. This is Scandinavia in the Viking Age, a land of extremes. Summers are short bursts of frantic work when every hour of light is claimed for farming, fishing, or building. Winters are long, dark, and merciless. The balance between the two seasons is not equal. Winter wins every time. Snow piles high against the walls of your home, pressing inward with the determination of an enemy siege. And the wind, it doesn't whistle, it howls, slipping through every crack in the timber, sliding under your cloak, sneaking into your shoes. Even the best-built longhouse can feel like an enthusiastic wind tunnel. You pull your wool cloak tighter, grateful for the coarse fibers, though they itched with the persistence of 1,000 tiny complaints. Wool is the Viking answer to almost every problem. Tunic, trousers, socks, even hatsoul spun from sheep whose fleeces are more practical than fashionable. Yet wool, for all its virtues, can only do so much against the dampness. The air here is rarely crisp and dry. It is wet, heavy, and stubborn. If you've ever worn socks that got soaked in a puddle and then had to keep them on all day, you have already experienced the Viking climate in miniature. Only here, the puddle is the entire landscape. Still, people adapt. They dry their cloaks by the fire each night, even if that means smelling faintly of smoke the next day. They line their shoes with moss or hay to absorb the wetness, knowing that no amount of cleverness will keep their feet entirely dry, and they keep moving. Standing still in this weather is an invitation to misery. Work, whether it's chopping wood, tending animals, or mending, boats becomes the only reliable way to stay warm. Yet there's a strange beauty to it all. The snow reflects what little sunlight there is, turning fields into sheets of silver. The air, though harsh, is also crisp with salt when you near the sea, or sweet with pine if you wander inland. On rare clear days, the sky is a sharp, endless blue, the kind that makes you forgive the frostbite nibbling at your fingertips. For a moment, even as your breath catches in the cold, you can see why people call this land home. Of course, beauty doesn't fill your belly or protect your livestock. The relentless climate dictates everything: what you eat, when you work, how you sleep. Crops must be planted and harvested quickly in summer, or the frost will claim them before they ripen. Animals must be brought inside for the winter, their warmth useful but their smell less so. And every family knows that a single harsh season can mean a lean year, or worse. The cold is not just background, it is a character in this story, a constant companion. It shapes the toughness of the people, sharpens their resilience, and forces them to rely on one another. If you think of the Viking Age only in terms of battles and you miss the bigger truth. Their greatest opponent wasn't always another warrior. It was the climate. You stand in the snow a moment longer, feeling your cheeks sting and your breath cloud. You can imagine yourself longing for the comfort of the longhouse, smoky as it was. Yet life here was not about comfort, it was about survival in partnership with this unforgiving land. You would need food from the sea, warmth from the hearth, and endurance from within. And that thought leads you naturally down the slope toward the shoreline, where the sea waits equal parts provider and predator. For in the Viking Age, the cold was only half the battle. The other half was the water stretching endlessly at the edge of every horizon. You leave behind the snowpacked fields and trudge down toward the shoreline, boots crunching against frozen earth. The air sharpens as you near the water, carrying the smell of salt and seaweed. A scent that lingers on every garment, every tool, every breath of those who live here. For Vikings, the sea isn't a backdrop. It is the main stage. It feeds you, carries you, and occasionally tries to swallow you whole. The first thing you notice is how alive it seems. The waves roll with a steady rhythm, slapping against the rocky shore, like a hand tapping out an impatient beat. The sea is both highway and hazard. On calm days, the longships skim across the surface with surprising grace, their oars flashing in unison, their sails billowing like great lungs drawing in air. On stormy days, the same waters turn treacherous, black and heaving, with swells high enough to make you reconsider every life choice that puts you on a boat made of planks and tar. You imagine yourself climbing into one of those long ships. The wood creaks beneath your feet. Tar-scented seems oozing slightly where the builders work to waterproof it. There's no deck, no shelter, just open exposure to wind and spray. If it rains, you're wet. If it's cold, you're frozen. If the sea is angry, you simply cling to the oar and hope your ancestors are paying attention. And yet, these ships are marvels of engineering. Sleek and light enough to be carried across land, yet strong enough to cross the North Sea. You could row into a river one day and be at open ocean the next. A flexibility that made the Vikings as unpredictable as the weather. The sea isn't just for raiding, despite the reputation. For every voyage of pillage, there are dozens more of trade, travel, and fishing. Nets are cast, lines are dropped, and the ocean yields cod, herring, and shellfish. You might smoke some salt others, and dry the rest until they're as tough as leather, but just as necessary. The sea provides not only food, but also the means to preserve it. Salt clinging to the rocks and shores, harvested carefully for the winter stores. But danger is never far away. A sudden squall can overturn a boat, even close to shore. A fog can roll and so thick you cannot see your hand before your face, leaving you rowing in uncertain circles until hunger or rocks find you. And always there is the possibility of never returning. The sea gives and the sea takes, and Viking families live with both sides of that truth every single day. Still, standing on the shoreline, you cannot deny its pull. The horizon calls with promises of new land, new wealth, and new stories. It's the same pull that would eventually carry Viking ships to England, to France, even to the edges of North America. All of that began with mornings like this, a simple walk from the longhouse to the shore, a gaze across the water, and a decision. Risk or remain? You watch the gulls wheel overhead, their cries sharp against the endless waves. The sea reflects the pale northern sky, and you realize it is both mirror and mystery. To live in the Viking Age was to live in constant negotiation with this element, sometimes partner, sometimes enemy, always inescapable. And when you turn away, your eyes catch the land again. Rocky soil, sparse fields, and the thin line of smoke curling from the longhouses. If the sea dictated where you could go, the land dictated how you could stay. Which brings you to the next challenge of Viking life, coaxing crops from soil that often seemed determined to refuse. You step back from the shoreline, shaking the salt from your cloak, and turn your gaze inland. The land looks quiet, almost inviting in its stillness, but the truth is far less generous. Farming here is a negotiation with a partner who doesn't really want to sign the contract. The soil is thin, rocky, and stingy, scattered with stones that seem to multiply no matter how many times you clear them away. Every spring, you haul rocks from the field, stack them into walls, and discover, by the next season, that the stones have mysteriously replenished themselves as though the earth is playing a very slow, very unfunny joke. The growing season is short, squeezed between the late thaw and the early frost. You must plant quickly, weed quickly, harvest quickly, and then pray the weather docen Tea undo all your work with a cold snap or a poorly timed storm? Barley and rye become your mainstays not because they are luxurious, but because they are hardy. Barley for bread, rye for bread, porridge from both. If you thought variety was the spice of life, the Viking farmstead would gently remind you that variety is more of a rumor. A splash of oats or beans here and there, maybe some turnips if fortune smiles. But most days, it's grain in one form or another. You crouch down and run a hand over the soil. It crumbles dry in summer, clings like sticky clay after rain. The plow you use is simple, a wooden frame, tipped with iron, pulled by oxen or, if times are lean, by yourself and a helpful neighbor. It cuts shallow furrows, not deep ones. And you scatter seed with a movement so practiced, it feels like second nature. Birds circle overhead, waiting for their share. And you know they'll get it, no matter how many stones you throw to chase them off. Life revolves around this labor. Children scatter feed for chickens. Women tend to kitchen gardens where herbs and cabbages grow. Men wrestle the plow across stubborn fields. Everyone contributes, because everyone must, and still, harvests are uncertain. A bad year means lean meals, fewer animals surviving the winter, and the grim awareness that your neighbors are likely in the same position. There is no convenient grocery store a fjord away. There is only what you grow, what you preserve, and what you can barter. Yet, the farm is not just struggle. It is also the heart of daily life. The place where long houses sit, where fires burn, where families laugh, argue, and endure together. The smoke from peat fires curls above the roofs. The smell of bread baking mingles with that of manure, and Litho Bruto feels grounded. You know the sea might carry you away, but the soil is what holds you here. As you rise from the fields, brushing dirt from your hands, your gaze shifts toward the low stone walls and wooden pens nearby. For the truth is, farming alone cannot sustain you in this climate. You need animals' warm bodies for heat, milk, meat, and more. And so, you wander from the rocky soil toward the bleeding chorus of sheep and goats, ready to meet the other half of survival on a Viking farm. You follow the sound before you see them bleats and low moos carrying across the field, sharp against the wind. Then, around the bend, you find the pens, wooden fences patched with whatever materials are handy. Stones, branches, even the odd broken tool. Inside, sheep cluster in a woolly knot, their breath steaming in the cold. Goats, more daring, clamber on the fence rails as though scheming their next escape. And in the corner, a cow shifts slowly, the steady anchor of the small herd. Animals are not just background scenery. They are, quite literally, survival on legs. Sheep give you wool, which means warmth when the wind claws at your bones. Goat's milk becomes cheese, sour but filling, something that can be stored and traded. A cow, if you're lucky enough to keep one, is a treasure. Milk, meat when she grows too old, and strength to pull a plow across fields that resist you at every turn. Each animal is more than itself. It is clothing, fuel, food, laboral, bundled up in a shivering, occasionally stubborn body. You notice how close they live to you, not just in spirit but in fact. In winter, the animals may share the long house with the family, penned off at one end. Their body heat helps warm the space, though the smell is, let's say, imagine falling asleep to the gentle lull of chewing jaws, the occasional snort, and the not-so-gentle perfume of manure. Congratulations! You now own Central Heating, Viking Edition. It is warm, yes, but also damp and earthy. And if fleas weren't already your nightly bedfellows, the livestock make sure they find their way indoors. Feeding the animals is another daily wrestle with nature. In summer, they graze on meadows and hillsides. In winter, it's all about stored hay, which is never quite enough. You watch as people drag armfuls into the pen, careful not to waste a single strand. Goats chew at the fences when they get bored, and sheep stare at you with blank determination, as if daring you to let the pile run out. But for all their trouble, these animals are cherished. Without them, You would freeze, starve, or both. Wool spun into yarn, hides turned into leather, bones shaped into tools. Every piece has its use. Even dung, dried in the sun, can be burned as fuel. Nothing is wasted, because nothing can be wasted. And still, animals are not only for work and warmth. They carry symbolic weight, too. A feast with roasted meat marks a special occasion. A gift of cattle seals an alliance. A sacrifice at a shrine speaks directly to the gods. Livestock are currency, insurance, and connection woven into both economy and belief. Standing there among the bleats and brays, you can't help but notice the smell of smoke drifting faintly from the nearby longhouse. It reminds you that the animal's wool and milk are only part of the survival story. The real center of warmth, of family life, is that smoky hall with its single fire and sagging rafters. And so you leave the animals to their chewing and step toward the longhouse, where life indoors has its own set of brutal comforts. You duck beneath the low doorway, stooping as you enter the longhouse. Inside, the air greets you like a wall warm, yes, but heavy, thick with smoke that has nowhere to go but sideways. There is a central fire pit, its flames licking upward, but no chimney above to carry the smoke away. Instead, the gray haze hangs in layers, drifting, swirling, finding its way into your hair, your clothes, and most definitely your lungs. After a while, your eyes sting, your throat feels scratchy, and you learn to live with it. You don't get fresh air. You get smoky air. That's the deal. Still, the fire is everything. It cooks your food, hardens your tools, lights your space, and most importantly, keeps you alive through the brutal cold. You sit near it at night, wrapped in wool, sharing space with family, servants, and sometimes even animals. Sparks crackle, embers glow red like buried jewels. You learn the art of fire maintenance, spanking coals so they last through the night, nudging logs at the right angle, coaxing flame from kindling before it dies. Fire is the heartbeat of the home, the measure of safety. Around the edges of the hall, raised wooden platforms serve as beds. Straw is heaped beneath furs, giving you somewhere that is not quite soft, but at least not the hard-packed earth. Privacy is minimal. You sleep beside family, servants, maybe a guest or two. Every cough, every snore, every midnight shuffle is heard. It is a symphony of shared existence. If you wanted solitude, you should have been born in another millennium. And yes, there are fleas. Congratulations again! Your bed still comes with free roommates. The longhouse is not just a shelter. It is a universe in miniature. Here, meals are cooked in heavy pots, suspended over the flames. Conversations stretch into the night. Stories are told. Songs sung. The light is dim, flickering. Shadows leaping against timber walls. Children play quietly in corners. Women weave or spin wool. Men repair tools by firelight. Every task is squeezed into this smoky box where warmth and claustrophobia exists side by side. You take a moment to inhale. The smell is layers upon layers. Wood smoke, wet wool, boiled broth, damp earth, human sweat, and a faint tang of manure drifting in from the animal pen. It is not pleasant, exactly, but it is deeply alive. And you realize your nose is slowly adjusting. Maybe not happily, but enough to endure. And as you settle down near the fire, rubbing warmth into your hands, you notice that every pot of stew, every loaf of bread baking on the embers, carries with it the question of food. Because warmth alone cannot sustain you. You must eat! And eaten in the Viking Age, as you're about to discover, is not so much a culinary adventure as it is a daily gamble with scarcity. Your stomach growls as you peer into the iron pot suspended above the fire. The smell is complicated. A little meaty, a little earthy, and vaguely smoky, as though the stew has been cooking since the last solstice. Which, in a way, it has. Viking stews were less a single meal and more a never-ending project. Ingredients were added when available, eaten when hungry, and topped up again the next day. If you're picturing a rustic soup with neatly cut vegetables, think again it's closer to a swamp of broth that remembers the ghost of every onion, fish head, and bone ever thrown into it. Your spoon finds a turnip chunk, soft and mealy. It's not glamorous, but it's filling. You chew and taste the soil, still clinging faintly to it, despite someone's attempt at scrubbing. Then comes a bite of barley, boiled into submission until it resembles thick porridge more than grain. Occasionally, a precious shred of meat floats by, which feels like winning a tiny lottery. More often, though, you'll meet the ever-faithful dried fish. Preserved months ago, it's as salty and chewy as leather, softened only slightly by hours of boiling. Congratulations! You've just invented the world's least exciting surf ant. Bread is the other staple, though bread may be a generous word. Flat, coarse, dark with ground grains, sometimes mixed with seeds, sometimes baked on hot stones. It's dense, heavy, and occasionally gritty, thanks to fragments of stone left behind by primitive grinding methods. You don't just eat Viking bread, you exfoliate your teeth with it. Dental hygienists, had they existed, would have been grateful for the business. Still, you tear off a piece, dip it into the stew, and discover it's edible when softened. Practicality beats pleasure here. Food in the Viking Age isn't about variety. It's about survival. You eat what the land and sea allow, and in the north, that's often fish, dried, smoked, salted, or fermented. Fish fills the gap when hunting fails or fields yield poorly. Occasionally, you'll stumble upon something fancier: wild berries in summer, honey if bees cooperate, maybe even imported spices if a trader passes through. But most days, it's stew, bread, and fish. Reliable, if not exactly thrilling. As you wipe your bowl with the last scrap of bread, your thoughts drift toward how all this food arrives in your pot. Hunting, fishing, farming, Chabruto! Task in its own right! You glance toward the door, where the wind whistles faintly, and realize tomorrow you'll likely be out in that cold, chasing the next meal. For now, though, you sit back in the smoky glow, full enough to endure the night. And that, in the Viking Age, is already a quiet victory. Because outside, beyond the longhouse, waits the endless sea. And the sea is not just where your next meal comes from, it's also the highway that defines Viking life. The morning comes with the smell of brine. Not just the stew pot kind of brine, actual salt air drifting in from the coast. You find yourself standing on the pebble shore, staring at the sleek hull of a longship resting in shallow water. It looks impossibly narrow, almost fragile, yet you know it is both lifeline and weapon, as essential as the longhouse fire. The longship is the Vikings' passport, freight train, fishing boat, and battlefield all rolled into one creaking vessel. And now, apparently, you're climbing aboard. The planks beneath your feet are slick with seawater and tar. There's no deck, no cabin, no cozy below-deck quarters. Just an open boat, ribs exposed, benches running down each side, and a single mast with a square sail furled for now. You're handed an oar-long heavy, polished smooths from calloused hands before yours. This is not a pleasure cruise. This is labor. You settle onto the bench, wedge your boots against the ribbing, and prepare to row until your arms question all of your life choices. The sea is rarely polite. One moment it's flat and glassy, reflecting the sky like a giant mirror. The next, it heaves and slaps against the hull, soaking you in icy spray. The smell of salt clings to your clothes, mixes with the pitch smeared into the ship's seams, and soon everything you own smells like ocean. Your stomach lurches with each wave, and you try to distract yourself by watching gulls swoop overhead. They're not a good omen. Where gulls circle, land is often near, but not always soon enough. Meals at sea are as thrilling as meals on land, which is to say, not very. You gnaw on dried fish, harder now, because the salt has crystallized, and chew it with a determination bordering on desperation. You drink ale or watered-down mead because fresh water goes bad too quickly. Everything is damp. Everything is sticky with salt. And yet, you realize this fragile craft can cross not just fjords and bays, but entire seas. England, Ireland, even farther lands await on the horizon, and these small boats are the keys. The longship creaks, the sail finally unfurls, and the wind takes over. It bellies outward like a chest inhaling deeply, pulling you faster than any oar could. The sound changes from grunts of men rowing to the hum of ropes and the rhythmic slap of waves. For a moment, you almost forget the danger. It feels free, like gliding, as though the ocean is suddenly your ally instead of your enemy. But you know better, it can turn in a heartbeat, swallowing ships whole. As the shore grows distant, you glance back at the coast and the memory of stew, bread, and smoky longhouses. The sea may carry you to wealth, raid, or trade, but it also promises storms, exhaustion, and the constant threat of not returning at all. And yet, Vikings launch themselves into it again and again. You begin to understand why the sea is opportunity. And when opportunity feels this wide, this endless, you take it. Soon enough, though, opportunity doesn't just mean sailing for trade. Sometimes it means fighting for land, for survival, for sheer reputation. And battles, as you're about to find, were far from glorious. They were noisy, chaotic, and as brutal as the age itself. The sea eventually brings you back to land, though not always to your own. This time, your feet sink into foreign sand, and the air is alive with tension. Around you, warriors shift nervously, adjusting shields, gripping spears, and muttering prayers to gods who may or may not be listening. You can smell iron cold, metallic from the weapons. You can also smell sweat, leather, and the faint temps of fear. This is not a raid for cattle or This is a fight, and you are standing in the thick of it. When the clash begins, it's not the elegant choreography you might expect from a movie. It is noise and mess and the unmistakable reality that everyone involved would rather be anywhere else. The shield wall is the Vikings' favorite tactic. Shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapped, creating a barrier that creaks and groans under pressure. You jam yourself into the line, pressed so close to your neighbor that you can smell the smoked fish on his breath. The wall is meant to protect, but it also means there's nowhere to run. Spears jab from behind the shields, swords flash when there's an opening, and axes well. Axes are the true terror. They are tools as much as weapons, built for chopping wood or skulls depending on the day. You swing clumsily, the weight jarring your arms, and realize just how exhausting even a few minutes of this is. The noise is overwhelming. Men shouting, shields clanging, boots grinding into dirt. If you ever thought modern crowds were loud, imagine a stadium where everyone forgot their inside voices and also carried sharpened steel. You notice quickly that glory looks different from the inside. It's not shining armor or heroic speeches, it's mud in your mouth, bruises on your shoulders, and the hope that your shield holds. Even victory is Winning means fewer of you fell than the other side. The survivors drag home what they can. Goods, captives, sometimes just the story that they lived through. Those stories, of course, will be told around fires later, polished into sagas where the fear and chaos are replaced with bravery and fate. But you, standing here in the grit of it, know better. And yet, battle is only part of the Vikings' brutal life. For every raid or clash, there are long months in between, where survival depends not on weapons but on weather, harvests, and the thin margin between hunger and enough. As the noise of the battlefield fades, your thoughts drift back to the quieter struggle daily survival against the elements themselves.
You live in a world where death is never far from the table. The winter frost can claim a neighbor just as easily as a sword on a raid. Childbirth is risky, wounds turn sour, and even a bad cough might become a farewell. It isn't morbid to think of the afterlife here. It's practical, like considering tomorrow's weather. When you picture what comes next, you might hope for Valhalla, the great hall of Odin. There, the bravest warriors feast endlessly, drinking mead from horns the size of your arm, sparring by day and healing by night. But not everyone ends up there. Some believe they'll find peace in the Fala of the goddess Freya, where the honored dead gather under gentler skies. And if your death was less dramatic, no heroics, Just the ordinary passing of age or sickness, you might expect hell. Despite modern associations, hell is not fire and torment. It is quieter, colder, more a shadowy echo of life than a punishment. A place of endings, but not cruelty. Funerals are community affairs. You see smoke rise from a pyre, the body turned to ash under flame, or perhaps you attend a burial, earth pressed over the dead. Grave goods are tucked carefully alongside the departed, an axe, a comb, a favorite brooch. Sometimes entire boats are used, the vessel itself becoming the coffin, equipped with everything the soul might need for the long voyage ahead. These offerings speak to a simple idea that death is not an end but a journey, and you should never travel unprepared. There is no hiding from mortality here. Children watch the rituals, neighbors gather to grieve, and life resumes the next morning with the same chores waiting. The sheep still need feeding, the nets still need mending, and the hearth still needs wood. Death may linger in the mind, but survival insists you keep moving. You tell a joke at supper, you laugh at the weather's cruelty, you sing a song to pass the evening. Existence is fragile, but also stubborn.
The longhouse hums with a rhythm that is not set by music, but by workin' endless, steady pulse of chores. From the moment you open your eyes to the glow of the hearth, your day is spoken for. Wool must be spun, thread must be woven, and cloth must be shaped into something useful. If you've ever stared at a pile of laundry and sighed, imagine that pile multiplied by every sheep in the district. And instead of a machine doing the work, it's your fingers, hour after hour, twisting wool into thread. The loom looms literally a towering wooden frame that eats hours of your day as you shuttle threads back and forth. Cooking, too, is no simple matter. The cauldron bubbles, but it does so only if someone is crouched beside it, stirring feeding wood into the fire, adjusting the iron pot so it doesn't scorch. Meals are not quick. They are a slow courtship of smoke and patience. Grain must be ground by hand on heavy stones, which means crouching and pushing until your arms ache. Then comes kneading dough or boiling porridge that tastes almost identical to yesterday's and the day before that. You don't cook for pleasure, here you cook for endurance. Tools wear down with frightening speed. A wooden handle cracks, you replace it. An iron knife dulls, you sharpen it. Shoes split, you stitch them with leather thongs. Nothing is disposable because nothing is easily replaced. Every object you touch has been mended more times than you can count. A cloak may be patched until it looks like a quilt, and a pot may be riveted until it rattles like an old man's knees. But both will be used until they simply cannot be coaxed into usefulness anymore. Children, too, are absorbed into this economy of labor. Small hands carry buckets of water from the well, sloshy and heavy, sometimes spilling half on the way. They chase sheep into pens, learn to whittle spoons, and practice weaving narrow braids before they graduate to the loom. Play exists, but it slips in like a secret wooden horses carved from scraps. Dolls made from rags, little figures tucked into corners. The toys are simple, but the laughter is the same as any child's today. Still, play is a brief pause, not the main occupation. Hands are rarely idle. This endless tide of chores binds everyone together. One person's laziness could ripple outward into hunger for the whole household. To fall behind is not simply inconvenient. It is dangerous. And so the community runs on effort and expectation, each task dovetailing into another until the day blurs into a fabric of repetitive motions. Yet within that fabric, there are bright threads moments when the rhythm halts, when the hearth fills not with the smell of porridge, but with something sweeter. These are the festivals, the feasts, the rare breaks in the cycle. And it is there, amid music and drink, that the monotony loosens its grip, if only for a little while. After days that blur together in smoke, chores, and aching muscles, the arrival of a feast is like someone has thrown open a window in your routine. The longhouse, usually dim and work-heavy, comes alive with warmth and noise. The fire glows brighter, more wood tossed on with joyful recklessness.
and the smell of roasted meat fills the air in a way that makes you forget porridge even exists. For once, you don't eat in silence with the steady scrape of spoons. Tonight, there is laughter, song, and maybe a little boasting, though. You'll notice the stories grow larger with each horn of ale that passes from hand to hand. The food itself feels almost decadent compared to daily fare. A roasted pig or goat sits at the center, sizzling fat crackling into the flames. Bread appears in greater quantity, and sometimes honey is drizzled, as though the gods themselves had handed down a treat. Mead, sweet and heady, flows freely, carried in carved horns and wooden cups that never seem to stay full for long. You might find fish, dried fruit, or even imported spices if the traders have been generous. Everything is eaten with gusto, as though tomorrow's hunger is not invited to the table. But the feast is not just about filling stomachs. It is about binding people together. Songs rise, not polished choirs, but hearty chants that make the rafters tremble. Storytellers take their place near the fire, weaving sagas of gods and ancestors, sometimes so long-winded you suspect they hoping you'll nod off before they have to finish. Music hums along flutes, drums, maybe a harp, simple instruments, but enough to make the hall feel like it's pulsing with life. The children, for once, run about without being scolded, and even the weary grandmother taps her foot to the rhythm. These gatherings serve another purpose too. They remind you that life, though hard, is not all drudgery. The feast is a release valve, a way of declaring loudly and with full bellies that survival is not the only goal. There is joy to be wrung out of this world, even if it means raising a cup of mead while your cloak still smells faintly of sheep. The memory of these nights lingers long after the fire dies down, helping to steady you through the long days when chores creep back in and the cold winds whistle through the cracks of the longhouse. And with such gatherings comes another reality. These are moments when news and gossip spread, when alliances are forged, when neighbors remember they're part of something larger than their own smoky hut. Festivals are not just merriment. They are the glue of the community, the spark that keeps the Viking world from grinding itself down into silence. Which, of course, leads to the question, what happens when the feast ends? And you must step outside, into the night air, under a sky ablaze with strange lights and endless stars. Step outside the longhouse after a feast, and you begin to notice something. Not every hall is the same size, and not every table inside holds equal bounty. Wealth, even in the Viking world, is unevenly spread. For the farmer who spends his days coaxing barley from the soil, a feast is an extraordinary occasion, a rare break from thin stews and rye bread. For a wealthy chieftain, however, it's Tuesday, another chance to display generosity and power by keeping others well-fed. You, as an ordinary soul, might live in a timber and turf house, smoky and cramped, with your possessions tucked into a single wooden chest. Wealthier households, by contrast, have larger halls, better timber, carved benches, perhaps even imported goods like silk or fine glass beads. Imagine walking into such a space after living in your drafty hut. Feels like stepping into another world, where the fire burns hotter and the air smells less of livestock and more of spiced drink. Wealth shows itself most clearly in clothing and adornment. A simple tunic dyed with whatever local plants provide is your daily wear, perhaps patched at the elbows and smelling faintly of smoke. A rich man or woman, on the other hand, might stride past in deep-dyed wool, fastened with ornate bronze brooches or silver clasps, glittering like portable status symbols. Jewelry is not frivolous, is a declaration. Necklaces, arm rings, and decorated combs speak of trade connections stretching far beyond the village. Even grooming becomes a mark of difference. Fine combs and imported oils for some, lice and smoke-stiff hair for others. Yet the relationship between rich and poor is not simply envy. Wealthy chieftains rely on the loyalty of those with less, binding them through gifts, feasts, and promises of protection. You might bring your labor, your sword, or your oaths, and in return you receive security, food, or the occasional trinket. It's a web of obligation as much as inequality. The poor may toil harder, but the rich cannot afford to ignore them. Still, you know where you stand the moment you sit at a table. The rich carve the meat. You receive the broth-soaked bread. And while the gap may feel wide, survival ties everyone together. Hunger, winter, and danger do not care how fine your brooch is. Which is why, when all else fades, it's often faith and belief that give people a sense of balanced turning thoughts toward the gods who perhaps care little for gold or rags.
The Viking Age is remembered above all for the sudden appearance of longships on foreign shores, sometimes as traders, sometimes as raiders, often as both. To you, living in a modest farmstead, the call of the sea offers something your smoky longhouse never can, a chance to escape the cycle of sowing and reaping. To seek wealth and adventure beyond the horizon, raiding is dangerous but intoxicating. Tales spread of monasteries overflowing with silver chalices, of coastal towns fat with goods and weakly defended. A farmer's son, otherwise destined for a lifetime of scraping at thin soil, might leap at the chance to grasp fortune in a single summer. The risks are great storms, foreign armies. Even betrayal among your own crew, but the rewards shimmer in every story retold by returning warriors, yet raiding is only half the story. Trade, quieter but steadier, weaves the Viking world into distant networks. Amber from Baltic shores, walrus ivory from the north, furs from the forest, all flow outward. In return, come silks, glass beads, spices, and silver coins stamped with foreign rulers' faces. A single silver dirham from the east, slipping into your palm, feels like holding proof that your small world connects to lands far beyond imagining. The same longship can carry warriors to raid one coast and traders to barter on another. Violence and commerce intertwine, with reputation often deciding which role is played. A well-armed crew arriving with swords sheathed might be welcomed as merchants. The same men with blades drawn become raiders in an instant. For you, the choice is not simple. To stay home means safety, but little change. To go abroad offers danger, glory, or ruin. The sea calls, restless and wide, whispering promises of riches and tales to outlive you. And whether through plunder or trade, those journeys will knit your small farmstead into the fabric of the wider world, forever reshaping what it means to be Viking. Winter in the Viking Age is less a season and more a test of endurance. You retreat into the longhouse, where thick walls of turf and timber do their best to keep out the snow and wind, but never quite succeed. Cold seeps through cracks like an uninvited guest, settling into your bones no matter how close you huddle to the central fire. The smoke from that same fire stings your eyes and clings to your clothes, but you tolerate it because, without it, the darkness would be absolute. Outside, fields lie dormant, buried under frost. Animals, if you've managed to keep them alive, are crowded into pens close to the house, their smell mingling with yours in an intimate blend of survival. The longhouse is no palace, it's a single, stretched room where every breath, every cough, every creak of wood becomes part of the shared soundtrack. Privacy is a fantasy. You sleep, eat, and work in the same smoky space, day after day. The world shrinking to the rhythm of chores, and the occasional argument over who forgot to mend a tool or scrape a pot. Food becomes both comfort and worry. You ration carefully, dipping into stores of dried fish, salted meat, and barley. Every time you untie a sack or break open a barrel, you wonder if it will last until spring. Meals are repetitive gruel. Bread, broth, more gruel, but the occasional feast day adds variety. You chew slowly, not out of politeness, but because stretching each mouthful feels like stretching the season itself. The days blur. Work never disappears. Wool still needs spinning. Leather still needs scraping. Weapons need sharpening. But winter also invites stories. As the wind howls against the walls, you listen to sagas retold, half fact and half invention. Heroes clash with monsters. Gods meddle in mortal lives. And sometimes you suspect the storyteller is simply buying time until the next chore. Laughter ripples through the room, cutting the monotony like a spark in the dark. Yet winter is also when sickness prowls. offs echo, fevers rise, and herbs are burned in the hope they'll drive away unseen forces. You've seen neighbors vanish in these months, their names slipping into memory before the snow melts. Mortality is never far, but neither is resilience. You endure because there is no alternative, and spring always feels like a promise waiting just beyond the next drift of snow. So you wait. You mend what can be mended. You whisper thanks when the fire still smolders in the morning. And in the long dark nights, when the wind rattles the walls like an impatient visitor, you dream of the thaw when doors can be flung open, animals driven out, and life will once again spill beyond the smoky confines of the longhouse. Life in the Viking Age may seem like a relentless grind of work, hunger, and cold, and in many ways it is. But even in such a demanding world, people carve out moments of comfort, little sparks of humanity that make the hardship bearable. For you, these comforts are modest, sometimes fleeting, but all the more precious for it. Perhaps it's the warmth of a fur cloak, heavy on your shoulders, warding off the chill that never quite leaves the longhouse, or the simple pleasure of slipping your hands around a carved wooden cup filled with warm ale, the steam rising as if to remind you that life still holds sweetness. You might chew on dried fruit brought back from distant trade routes, savoring each bite as though it were treasure. Music, too, threads through the gloom. Someone plucks at a lyre or hums an old song, the notes weaving with the crackle of the fire. Children, usually tasked with fetching water or tending goats, sometimes craft toys from scraps of wood, their play echoing faintly against the weight of the adult world. You may even smile at their small victories, a carved horse that actually stands on its own, or a doll that manages to survive more than a day of rough handling. There is also the comfort of company. Crowded though the longhouse may be, it means you are not alone. You share stories, jokes, and occasionally gossip. You tease your neighbor for snoring like Thor's hammer, or laugh when someone spills broth into their lap. These moments are not grand, but they stitch your days together, reminding you that survival isn't only about food and firewood, it's about spirit. Even ritual offers solace. Charm tucked into your clothing, a prayer whispered to the gods before sleep, a carved rune scratched into the wood of the house. Whether or not they truly protect you matters less than the comfort they bring. In a world where tomorrow is never guaranteed, belief itself becomes a form of warmth. So, while the Viking Age may look to us like a trial of endless struggle, for you, it is also filled with small mercies. The feel of wool against your skin, the crackle of fire in the hearth, the taste of a shared meal, the sound of laughter on a frozen night. These things may not erase the harshness, but they soften its edges. And so, after wandering through longhouses and across stormy seas, after sitting beside smoky hearths and standing at the edge of raids, you arrive at the quiet end of the Viking Age. Not with a great battle or a single dramatic moment, but with a slow fading. Just as winter surrenders to spring, the age of longships gives way to kingdoms, towns, and new faiths. For you, the Viking world has been one of contrasts. Hardship sat at the table with you, uninvited but always present. Cold gnawed at your bones, hunger shadowed your meals, and danger lay both in the sea and the soil. And alongside all this, there was resilience. There was laughter, even in smoky darkness. There were songs, charms, stories, and small comforts that warmed you when the fire burned low. The raids, of course, are what outsiders remember most, flashes of steel and cries along foreign shores. But for those who lived it, daily life mattered far more. The weaving, the farming, the chores that seemed endless, the winter nights when you shared broth and tales with neighbors. History is rarely as glamorous as legend. More often, it is survival by inches. And yet, the Vikings left more than smoke and ash in their wake. They left sagas, trade routes, towns, and ideas that stretched from North America to the Middle East. Their world was harsh, but their endurance carved a legacy far greater than they ever imagined, while spinning wool or sharpening axes. Now, as you rest at the close of this journey, you can let the noise of raids and the chill of winter drift away. You've walked the muddy paths, smelled the smoke, heard the creak of timber under the wind. You've seen the fear, the humor, the grit of ordinary lives. And in doing so, you've carried a little of that endurance with you. So, breathe out. The hearth fire has dimmed, the longhouse is quiet, and tomorrow belongs to someone else's history. For tonight, you've reached the end of the story, and that, at last, is enough.